What's up everyone? In this video I want to answer the question of how do I tell engaging, interesting stories when I have writer's block or I'm bored or I live a boring life. Now, this is a very interesting question, and even if you don't have any of those dilemmas, this video might still be of use to you because successful storytelling can be weaved into a lot of scenarios and situations to improve your success. Now, I'm not going to tell you that it's going to make you successful in all areas, because that's not exactly true. Even if, storytellers or artists will, tell you that, that's not always the case, but it is exceptionally useful in the right scenarios, and in a lot of scenarios you wouldn't expect. Why? Because for most of the thousands of years humans have been alive, we didn't have access to books or the internet. We passed down information through storytelling by the fire. And therefore, most people, even to this day, are still wired to receive information through storytelling, through listening. And that's why we, gravitate to stories so well. So if you understand that, you can package information in stories rather than just telling people stuff, and they will be so much more engaged in this video. I could just tell you, hey, this is what I'm going to teach you today. Or I could start off this video with, the other day I was walking down the road and something shocking happened. A huge race car just zoomed past me on the sidewalk, and it told me, the driver that is, that stories were amazing. And it just draws you in because you want to know what happens next. Now, how do you tell a great story? I'm going to share with you two passages from books that really explain this really well. And I mean, you should not be surprised that storytelling is like this. I mean, most people prefer listening to audiobooks to reading books because they're just more wired to do that. Modern society and technology has far outpaced our pace and speed of evolving to the changes of our environment. So a lot of our genetics are still wired towards thousands of years ago and not as efficient as they are in modern times. So long story short, storytelling is really important. Here's the first quote, and this will really help you out. This is from the book Ask Gary Vee, and he is actually answering the question of how do I create interesting content for a boring product or still industry. Now, he's specifically answering a question from a guy who probably has a business in a boring industry like lawyers or cars or something really boring, and he wants to create content on social media to market to them and make money. Here's how he answers this question, and it will really open your eyes. A white lawyer defends a black man in a small southern town. A spoiled rich girl gets married 3 times and survives the Civil War. Boy meets girl. Recognize any of these? Shaved down to their core, To Kill a Mockingbird, Gone with the Wind, and Romeo and Juliet sound pretty damn boring. Their lasting power lies in the fresh, imaginative, daring, surprising storytelling of their creators. There is no boring if you tell your story right. I think that's a very shocking, amazing, and insightful comment. And it's so true. If you aren't familiar with these books, they're timeless classics, and I have read 2 out of the 3, and they're honestly pretty boring to me. They're interesting enough to understand why they're interesting to other people, but to the general public and human society and civilization, they are acclaimed critically as some of the most timeless fictional pieces of all time, as at least in the Western Hemisphere. In the Eastern Hemisphere, and I'm fairly familiar with the Asian culture, they have their own timeless classics. But that is a feat considering how many books are out there. And when you really shave it down to its core, yeah, that's pretty much what the book is about. But the way they tell their stories, it's just very interesting, thought-provoking. So he goes on to talk about how you can do this. If you're asking this question, your problem isn't your content, it's your mindset. You have to shift your thinking immediately. You cannot change your output unless you change your input. Start by thinking of every possible way your business, brand, or product touches people, from what they eat to their hobbies to their conversation topics. Don't box yourself in. Use your imagination, blah, blah, blah. So he goes on for another page and a half, ranting about this. I just wanted to share with you probably the most impactful part. Then I want to jump to another book that will knock your socks off even more. It's the same type of concept, but this guy is apparently he's a marketing legend. His name is John Carlton. The book is called The Entrepreneur's Guide to Getting Your Shit Done. Let me just read you a bit of this. Okay, in his case, he answered a question of his audience, which were asking him, how can I write incredibly interesting stories when my life is so boring as a marketer and copywriter? Here's how he answered this question. Learn to see the connective stories in your life and in the lives around you. It will help you become a better writer overall and a killer copywriter specifically. The homework exercise I give the first day of a seminar is to come back from lunch with a short tale of what happened to you or around you. Most people are confused by this request. Nothing happened, they will insist. I had lunch at the deli, went to my room to pee, and came back. That's it. End of story. Really? Once I start digging, it becomes obvious that most people believe nothing ever happens to them because they are so zoned out and oblivious, they miss the action. Who, for example, was in the elevator with you as you went up and then down from your room? A young starry-eyed couple, obviously on a honeymoon on one side, with the dour older couple behind them, pointedly not speaking to each other. A group of drunken Shriners giggling at bad inside jokes. Kids soaking wet from a trip to the hotel pool, arguing about what happened to their room key, now probably settling near the drain in the deep end. Who was in there with you? The world is crammed with stories. Alfred Hitchcock would glance at a broken down motel on a desolate road, and the possibilities for a truly wicked plotline would bloom. Jack Kerouac hitchhiked across America eating apple pie, drinking with disillusioned intellectuals, and howling at the moon, and realized a good tale was engulfing him day by day. So he goes on and on for a dozen pages, and it's really good stuff. I recommend it. The chapter I'm reading this from is called Storytelling 101, but you can see the point here. These people, they do something I didn't even know that they did. They found what most average people would consider boring, and they took it and really examined it and appreciated it and saw every angle of it and saw how this could be really interesting, and then spun that and elaborated on that and used that restrictive mold to create these incredibly interesting creative stories. Small, simple stuff, even seemingly boring stuff, becomes creative. There's this YouTuber, and basically he creates visual effects based off his kid's imaginative playtime. His kid might imagine lava, and then he'll visually add that in with special effects. And he said in an interview that he purposely restricts his kid from consuming too much TV or media, because he's found the most creative juices come when you restrict. And I think that's very true. There's another YouTuber, and they're in cooking. They're called Brothers Green Eats. And they said that their best videos and ideas came when they restricted their budget and ingredients. Even though they had all this money to buy all these ingredients, their most effective, efficient, creative, and fun videos that got the most views were from the smallest budget and ingredients, because they purposely restricted. So creativity can come from restriction, but this is also about really appreciating and understanding the interestingness of the world. And that's also a life lesson that I think I've learned, and maybe you can learn as well. I think we've all gone through days that are just really boring, and we we wish they were better. And maybe you see people who live better lives or more interesting lives, and you're like, man, I wish I could live that life. I wish I could, skydive and then, jump into a pool with, 1,000 girls in it. Who knows what you want? But you live a pretty boring life. At least that's what you think. So it's a life change and perspective change on your attitude, on what you do see in your life, and see how it can be much more interesting than you give credit for, and appreciate that. And from that, you will bloom incredible stories. There's this incredibly well-known YouTuber. His name's Casey Neistat. He gets like 2 million videos per daily video that he releases now. And long story short, he did this whole YouTube advice video, and he said, for every movie, he used to be a huge filmmaker guy in Hollywood. He said, every video or movie, all that matters is the story. Everything else, visual effects, all the money in a budget, only are factored in to make the story better. And that's an amazing thing. And he said, like, it doesn't matter about budget, because if it was just about how much money you had, then the people who had the most money would always win. But that's not always the case. That's why there's $100 million budget movies that flop. It's about creativity, using that budget efficiently. He said all the lighting, all the fancy equipment, all the visual effects, all those things really do, or they should do, is help that story come to life. And if it doesn't, or if it doesn't work well, then you flop. And I think that's a very interesting angle. And you can clearly see that he tries to use this in his videos. And maybe that's why they do so well. People love a great story. There's a great book I recommend, especially if you're a fiction writer, to really understand or use stories better. And that one is called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. It's a great book that pretty much shows you that all the best fiction stories that you've ever read, whether it's Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or whatever else, they eerily all follow a very similar plot line. Hero who is just doing his own thing. He gets pulled on this magical journey, goes through struggle, eventually succeeds, and then goes back to his, original place to live a happy life. It's eerie why all these different stories have that same archetype, and it makes you wonder why humans relate to it so much, but we do. And so stories are an incredible thing that you can provide, whether you're writing articles, blog posts, you're writing a book, whether you're just trying to convey information in a way that will make people interested, so you're an interesting person, or so that they actually consume that information and take it in a work environment or in a dating or networking environment. Now, the last bonus piece of advice I want to give you is that this can definitely be applied to business, as Gary mentioned in his book, but there's also a different angle I want to share with you. So there's these two bloggers, one's named Neil Patel and the other is named Brian Dean, and they have both illustrated this. Both of them have helped people who blog in really boring industries, whether it's for a company or for themselves, really shine out. Neil has done this, and one of his ideas was basically, his whole basic concept is that you could turn any boring topic into something really interesting if you really just thought out of the box. And the example he used that he randomly picked out was the cocaine and drug industry. And he said, that's a pretty boring thing when you really think about it. It's just drugs and crack cocaine, right? And he said, if I were to blog about that, I would do something really interesting. I would create this moving graphic where you could literally see the cocaine, deposit in that person's mouth and move through the digestive system. And it's this huge visually colorful graphic of how it affects your organs and completely destroys your system. And you see that on a page moving through. That can be very interesting to someone, and that would work really well. And it just really shock someone. And then Brian Dean, he helped another person. This man was working in the health snack industry, which is a pretty boring industry. They were in the health snack vending machine industry. And long story short, this guy came up with this really interesting article. It was like 200 ways of eating a healthy snack and having a great time doing it. And it was a very thought-provoking article with videos and photos, and it was a really long article, like 5,000 words long. But the point was, he was able to turn something that was a boring topic into something very interesting. And long story short, this goes beyond just stories. I think this is about becoming an interesting person. And for someone like me who's oftentimes pretty boring, like in my videos I might seem more interesting to you, but for the 99% rest of my life it could be pretty boring. Whether you're looking to be more interesting to close a deal at work, or because you have constantly been that boring person who can't get a date and you always run out of stuff to say, now you have some ideas about how to be more interesting. So in conclusion, just to summarize it all up, don't use this crutch of, oh, I have a boring life, or, oh, I can't do boring, I have a very restrained life, I don't do interesting things. Really look into your life and see what you can do that's interesting. Let's say all you did that day was go to the bathroom. Well, you can spin that to be interesting. You could be like, I was going into the bathroom and oh my goodness, it just started smelling really bad. And this jerk off just started pooping and you could hear his poop from like a mile away. You can see how a story can start forming from that. And after I started reading this, and now that I'm speaking about it, I'm starting to realize that sometimes the most interesting people, the most funny comedians, it's not the fact that they have ridiculously interesting lives, it's that they make the most of the boring lives that they do have. And I think another component to that is to slowly make your life more interesting. And I think most people gets overwhelmed by this process that they don't. They're like, how am I supposed to ever possibly travel the world and skydive in the next year? It's impossible, so they don't even try. What about just small baby step to do something slightly more interesting? So one thing I've tried is to always push my comfort zone. So I went to a archery club for the first time in my life, and I hadn't done archery since elementary school, and it was me pushing my comfort zone, doing something interesting that I kind of didn't want to, that I kind of didn't find interesting, but I kind of did, and just wanted to do something new. And I did it, and it was fun, and it was a bit of a story. It wasn't, face value when I went there, it was kind of boring, kind of interesting, because I mean, you're just shooting arrows, right? But another part of me really started taking in this attitude of saying, this is, if I just am not that much of a downer and I really just enjoy this, it can be really interesting. And in a way it was. I literally just like pulled my string and let it go, and it ripped across my whole arm because I did it wrong. And for the next like 2 to 3 days, this whole side of my arm was black. That's a story to tell. And there's this other part during that whole archery club thing where they literally sat us up in a line, and we literally just like shot it into the air, and this thing would literally fly for like a quarter of a mile, and we would see who can go the farthest and who would be the closest to a target we were trying to hit. So that was a pretty cool long distance archery competition thing. So long story short, if you take it face value, was that place that fun? In all honesty, in certain ways it wasn't. It was like a long drive, pretty boring drive there, pretty boring drive back. For the majority of that thing, it was pretty much me shooting arrows. The fun and interesting parts really came from a shift in attitude, opening my eyes, and telling that story in a different way. Hopefully you learn some lessons. Hopefully you learn how to maybe tell better stories, be more interesting. And I highly recommend all the books that I showed you in this video. And if you're new to this channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button below if you're watching this on YouTube for free updates. I release videos every Thursday. And of course, if you want even more details about what I do or similar comprehensive articles or videos, there's plenty on my YouTube channel as well as back on my blog. If you don't know who I am, basically I do self-help type stuff. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next video. Peace.